Hi friends. Okay, so I'm gonna keep talking about systems of oppression. First off, uh, usual warnings. Uh, I'm probably biased about a lot of things, so keep that in mind when listening to me. So if you disagree, also just understand that I'm biased. Also, I want y'all to know that I'm not gonna claim to be an expert in any of this. I'm gonna try to put some sources every time, so that way y'all can go look at the books. But I don't mind talking about the books that I do talk about. Okay, so I'm going to talk about a system of oppression that we don't think of. Um, and I'm also going to kind of point out that a majority of systems of oppression that we deal with today come from white supremacy, um, which is a big deal because it does so much. Um, and it keeps us in a lot of different oppressed, a lot of different oppressions. So the oppression I'm going to talk about today is going to be borders. And you're going to be like, oh, Jane, a border is a border. Yeah, yeah, I believe you. And up until World War II, until the end, so at 19, oh no, not even, up until 1991, 2000, okay, don't quote me on any of that. Um, but when you think about the end of Soviet Russia, the USSR, Russia becoming Russia, um, all of East Asia becoming their own places, gaining autonomy, everything that happened, like Czechoslovakia, Croatia, all the genocide that happened because of those borders, moving borders even in the Middle East and or West Asia, which is the same place. I just technically it's West Asia. If you look at a different, I might talk about that. Actually, I will talk about that this time, because we're talking about borders. But so borders are always changing, and we've actually just kind of been at like this weird piece where borders haven't changed for a while. Um, and when like Russia attacked Ukraine, obviously Ukraine didn't want that because they like their autonomy. Those are a lot different. And so that has the potential to change the borders of those two places and of the rest of the world if people follow Russia's suit, and they could. Who knows? But talking about places like West Asia, the Middle East, um, some of the places in like Southeast Asia, and a lot of the countries of like Africa, a lot of those were built with capitalism and white supremacy in mind. Um, all of it comes down from colonialism, which was to mass produce colonies so they could mass produce their resources, take them, and have other places to live, more people, more theoretical slaves if you had slaves, um, things like that. Um, which, the U.S. was a colony until it wasn't. We had slaves until we didn't. Um, we fit like all of those things until we decided for autonomy, but not necessarily. The U.S. is complicated, but I'm not talking about the U.S. specifically, because when you look in like Africa, if I look at different countries in Africa, um, we don't. When they were divided on who called dibs. Similar to like American continents, where you just do American states, where we just kind of like put down posts. So, and you might be like, Ella Jane, why is that considered a system of oppression? Because not everybody believes in the same things or speaks the same language or likes each other. And because of all those things, as a system of oppression, language is a barrier and beliefs are a barrier, and I don't like you is a barrier. And so, like, the Hutus and Tutsis, back in, I believe it was the 90s in Rwanda, when they were fighting, it was because Rwanda didn't exist until we colonialized Africa. And so those two tribes were theoretically in the same country, but they didn't need to be in the same country. It made no sense for them because they did not necessarily like each other, which created a lot of political conflict. We see that in Western Asia or the Middle East, I'll keep saying it like that because I want y'all to know that I consider it West Asia. That's my bias, I guess, which is just less of a Western view. But I don't mind if the Middle East is considered West, personally. But when you take that into consideration, everything was up for grabs in West Asia after World War II. So we just, like, Europe called dibs on places. And then we said, hey, these are your borders. And we didn't take into consideration any ethnicities or anything like that. Which is a problem because, like, there's a whole people, I think the Kurdish people, don't quote me on that, who actually outnumber the people in the country, ethnicity wise. Like, no, the West Asia is full of Arab people, but not everybody there is Arab. There's, like Serbians, Turkish, it goes around. And so it's important to recognize that, but we didn't care. So we just kind of put them in there with no consideration, and that causes war, and it causes conflict. And that's why, like, it's a war-torn area. Well, there's a lot of ethnicities that we didn't necessarily know didn't get along, but we said they had to. We, as in the West, white people, give or take, but the West of the world, so America, Europe, and that created a lot of problems. Another one would be like Yugoslavia, after, because they didn't get along. No one did. You had Serbs who were their own ethnicity, and you had Croatian people, who were their own ethnicity, and you had Arabic people, you had, so when you take all those things into consideration, they did not like each other. Ethnicity might not necessarily be something that we consider important in America, even though at one time it was. But in Europe and in other places, ethnicity is almost everything, because we go by race, by color of our skin. It's is what we call race, but ethnicity is something completely different, and it's just like, and I know it blows some American people's mind that, hey, you have the same skin color, why not? No, because you're not. And you see it here, you used to see it here, with like how we treated immigrants. So, oh, you're Irish, I don't like you. Oh, you're Italian, I don't like you. Oh, you're this, and then you have all these names which are slurs, and I'm not going to repeat them because I don't want to use slurs. And their names, you're like, oh, that's not a slur, but it was at one point in time. And that's how it starts. Jewish people are an ethnicity, and they have been one that have been treated very poorly. But when you put ethnicities that not necessarily, like, when you take and consider like the borders, it doesn't take, we as the West, the white people, whatever you want to say, never took in consideration of the people who live there. We just took in consideration what we wanted, which is why colonialism is really bad, in my opinion, and my bias. I mean, there are good things to come out of it, sure. Most of it being money and places that now we live. But once again, like, it doesn't matter when you consider all the lives that are hurt by borders. You, like, look at America also, with our closed borders, theoretically. We used to be on relatively good terms with Canada where we can go back and forth, but we decide that we need a wall, and and how we let people in from Mexico because they look a little different. That is a system of oppression, because we can now choose who comes in and out, and it becomes a problem. Like, and don't get me wrong, passports and all that other stuff factors into that as well. I'm not against those things, because you need to keep track of people, for, like, if you committed really bad crimes or whatever. But like, look at Europe. They have an open border, and they thrive off of that. And they also have, like, standardized currency, which helps them as well. Britain does not do those things anymore because they Brexit, and that was their decision. But yeah, so borders are very much a system of oppression, because it puts you somewhere else. But if you also, and how we don't think about it, is if you want that land, If you want that border, if you want to move your border, you push people further and further, or you make them assimilate. Which making someone assimilate sounds really cool and easy, but it is not necessarily a good thing. I might talk about assimilation. Like when you look at it in regards to Native Americans, we tried to get them to assimilate into a white culture, and we never succeeded, but we shouldn't have done that in the first place. And so I'm happy we didn't succeed, but we also lost a lot of culture because we tried to do that. America is a mess when it comes to borders because we kept pushing ours, and look what happened to the Native Americans. We killed them all. Almost all of them. We basically killed them all. Which is an issue because that's a whole culture that we don't have anymore. They're still around. I want to say we haven't killed all of them, but there's so much, like there's so many different tribes and how we mix them. We basically killed the culture, but it's still around, and you can learn about it the best that we can. But we'll never have that good stuff anymore, and that's because we wanted to expand the borders. Even then, when you look at places like Texas, and you look at like New Mexico, or not New Mexico, sorry, Oklahoma. Oklahoma has a panhandle, which it doesn't necessarily make sense because it's really small and thin. And that reason was because they were trying to get rid of like slavery in America and in Texas. And so there was this whole negotiation where we shaved that small top part off, give it to Oklahoma, so we did. And we could keep slavery, so we did. Which is a whole nother, slavery is a whole nother system of oppression that I can talk about later. But when you consider like the Texas border, that's really interesting because that is a system of oppression because we kept it, we bargained with it for another system of oppression. And even Oklahoma existing as its border, that was Native American country. So that's where we pushed most of those people on until we decided we wanted that land again and pushed them even further and made our own borders again. All of it is important. So yeah, it's a huge system of oppression. Kind of goes back to like kingdoms and power and all this other stuff. But I want to talk about borders a little bit now. I might talk about language next time. I know I want to talk about education too. We'll see. Anyway, so rest in love, guys. Y'all take care of yourself, okay?